Hello, this is part 6 from chapter 10 on cell division in General Biology 1. In this part, in the previous section, in part 5, we looked at the individual steps in the process of meiosis. In this one, we want to look at what is the effect of meiosis. What does meiosis actually accomplish? And so we know that meiosis reduces chromosome number by 1/2, so that we have half the chromosomes in the egg cell, half the chromosomes in the sperm cell. But the other thing that meiosis does is meiosis causes these gametes, that is the egg cells and sperm cells, to be genetically different from each other. And the mechanisms causing variation are independent assortment and crossing over. Now, crossing over, we've looked at that before. This is the exchange of chromatid segments between homologs. And here's the diagram that we've looked at before for crossing over. This occurs during prophase 1, right at the very beginning of meiosis. And we have our two homologous chromosomes. There's a point at which these chromatids actually lay over one another or cross over one another. That point is called a chiasma, from the Greek letter chi. That's the point at which these will break and swap segments. And so we have a segment of what was the other homolog tacked onto this chromatid, and same way over here. So that when this is all at the end of meiosis, each one of these strands is different, and thus each one of the cells containing those strands is different from one another. Okay, independent assortment is the idea that the way one pair of homologs sorts into the gametes has no influence on what's going to happen with other homologous pairs of chromosomes. The gametes are going to have one chromosome from each homologous pair of chromosomes in all possible combinations. So, right here's idea of independent assortment. We have some organism out here that has a diploid number, 2n number of 4 chromosomes. That is 2 homologous pair of chromosomes. Then the number of unique gametes is going to be equal to 2 to the nth power, where n is the number of homologous pairs, so that would be 2 to the second power, which would be 4. And so you notice what happens here. We could have the chromosomes line up like this. The A pair could line up with dominant A on the left. B pair could line up with dominant B on the left. And they'd separate, and we'd get gametes with this combination of chromosomes. Okay? Or, just because dominant A lined up on the left, that has no bearing on what's going to happen down here in the B pair. We could have wound up with dominant B on the right, and when they separate, we would have got this combination, dominant A recessive B and recessive A dominant B. So, with 2 homologous pair of chromosomes, 1, 2, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 possible gametes. Okay, so the number of different combinations of chromosomes in the gametes is equal to 2 to the nth power, where n is equal to the number of homologous pairs. So that means in humans, each person can produce 2 to the 23rd power unique gametes, which would be over 8 million unique gametes. So in the male, the odds of 2 sperm cells being identical, about 1 in 8 million. In a woman, it would be the same thing. The odds of 2 egg cells being identical would be about 1 in 8 million. But since a woman only produces about 400 egg cells during her lifetime, odds are she will never produce 2 identical egg cells. Okay, let's look at these life cycles. Now, in animals, what we see is that we have a single-celled haploid state and a multicellular diploid state. Some of the simple eukaryotes, that is, some of the fungi and some of the algae, we have multicellular haploid and single-celled diploid. And in the plants, along with some of the fungi and algae, we have multicellular haploid and multicellular diploid. Now this is called alternation of generations, since mitosis and thus multicellular individuals occur in both the haploid and diploid generations. Okay, so here's our diagram. So for the animals, you notice that we start in right here with the haploid state. These gametes do not undergo division, so we do not have mitosis here. This is a single-celled haploid state. Then we're going to get union of these haploid gametes by means of fertilization, produces a diploid zygote. This divides by mitosis. We get a multicellular diploid, which then undergoes meiosis and produces a single-celled haploid state. Okay, here's our simple eukaryotes. This would be some of the fungi, some of the algae. And what will happen here is that we have through fertilization, we're going to get union of these haploid gametes, and we get this single zygotic cell that is diploid. That cell does not divide by mitosis like it does in an animal. It just stays as a single cell. That single cell immediately undergoes meiosis and produces these haploid cells that undergo mitosis. So we get these multicellular haploid, state, which eventually some of these individual haploid cells will serve as gametes and allow for fertilization. Okay, in the plants, along with some of the algae and some of the fungi, we're going to have mitosis on both sides of the line. We're going to have mitosis in the haploid state, producing a multicellular haploid, and we're going to have mitosis in the diploid state, producing a multicellular diploid. So to get from haploid to diploid, we'll have fertilization. To get from diploid to haploid, we'll have meiosis. Okay, here's some other versions of those diagrams, and notice right here with the animals, we have a single-celled haploid. That would be the egg cells or the sperm cells right there. And then we have this multicellular diploid state. So mitosis occurring in the diploid state. So this would be all of your somatic cells. This would be all of your body cells other than the egg cells and sperm cells, which would be here in this category. And then getting from diploid to haploid, we have meiosis. Getting from haploid to diploid, we have fertilization. Okay, some of the simple eukaryotes, that is some of the fungi and algae, we're going to have a single-cell diploid state, no mitosis occurring in the diploid state. This undergoes meiosis, produces haploid cells, which undergo mitosis, producing a multicellular structure. And then fertilization gives us a diploid again. That diploid does not undergo mitosis. That one diploid cell that's formed immediately undergoes meiosis. Okay, this is the case when you see, for example, fungi growing on leftovers in the refrigerator. That mycelial mass, that fungal mass that you see, is going to be right here. It's going to be this multicellular group of haploid. It's going to be this these haploid cells forming that multicellular fungal mat. Now then, right here in the plants, along with a few of the fungi and algae, we're going to have mitosis on both sides of the line. So it means we have a multicellular diploid state and a multicellular haploid state. Now, in the higher plants, such as oak trees and corn and such as that, all of the leaves and roots and stems that you see, that is going to be diploid tissue. The multicellular haploid state is going to be just a few cells. You might have maybe about 3 cell divisions producing about an 8 cell structure deep inside the flower. Okay, but if we go down to some of the lower plants, like some of the mosses, all of that green that you see in the mosses consists of haploid cells. So a multicellular haploid organism. And then it will send up a small shoot that will have a capsule, and this is the diploid state. So in the mosses, the haploid is actually the dominant state there. And this is called alternation of generations because we have multicellular organisms in both the diploid and the haploid state. Okay, gametogenesis. This is formation of the gametes. We can subdivide this into spermatogenesis, which obviously is formation of the sperm cells. The important feature of this is that all 4 cells coming out of meiosis become mature sperm cells. So basically this cell goes through the 2 divisions of meiosis, producing 4 haploid cells, all of which become mature sperm cells. Okay. Then we have the process of oogenesis. Whenever you have that double O prefix in front of a word, it refers to a female structure. So oogenesis is formation of the egg cells. The egg cell is also called the ova, plural, or ovum, singular. And what happens here is that cytokinesis is unequal, so each division results in a viable cell that gets almost all the cytoplasm, and then another one called a polar body, which receives little or no cytoplasm and dies. So only 1 out of the potential 4 cells from meiosis becomes an egg cell, or the ovum. So notice what happens right here. In the first division, this 1 cell gets almost all the cytoplasm. This other cell gets virtually no cytoplasm. A cell with almost no cytoplasm is termed a polar body. Okay, the second division, same thing. It is a very unequal division, and we end up with these cells that have almost no cytoplasm. Those cells are the polar bodies, and they die, leaving 1 cell that receives almost all the cytoplasm. That is a cell that becomes the ovum or the egg cell. Okay. So, timing of meiosis in the female is also different from the male. So at birth, all the primary oocytes are present, and they are at prophase 1. Beginning at puberty, these individual oocytes develop to become secondary oocytes and the first polar body. The oocyte is at metaphase 2 in the secondary oocyte stage. When released from the ovary, meiosis is still incomplete, and it's completed in response to contact with sperm cell. Okay, so here's a diagram, and you notice secondary oocyte, sperm cells coming in contact, very quickly complete meiosis, produce the polar bodies die, and we're left with the functional egg cell. In plants, we see the very same pattern. We'll get 4 male gametes out of meiosis, but only 1 functioning female gamete from meiosis. And so here's our diagram for the plants, and you notice in the female structure, here's 3 cells that are very small. They die off. This 1 cell coming out of meiosis will then wind up producing the egg cell. Okay, over here in the male part of the flower, meiosis occurs. It produces 4 functional gametes that become the pollen grains. Okay, and that will conclude chapter 10 Thank you.